for the... Okay, one moment. So, hello, everybody. I am Ana Polo, assistant professor of the University of Granada. And I would like to say to you, welcome to this second day of the International Conference on Tourism and Leisure Studies. Also, I would like to thank the effort by the organizer of committee from this Congress for the Common Ground Network at the University of Granada. Today, we are really excited because we are starting this journey with the plenary session titled Advancing Knowledge and Influencing Practice in Sustainable Tourism through Academic Publishings. The case of the Journal Sustainable Tourism, where is going to participate Professor Xavier and Professor Elisabeth Kastenholz as speakers. So let me introduce both of them very quickly. So in this moment, Xavier is with us. Welcome, Xavier, and thank you to join us. And of course, welcome, Elisabeth, and thank you also to join us. So as I said before, I am going to limit to introduce both of them so quickly. Firstly, Professor Elisabeth Kastenholz is Associate Professor at the University of Aveiro, Portugal. She has developed a very interesting research career focused mostly on rural tourism, considering tourism experiences, local and gastronomy products, regional development, and so on. And we could say that she is a reference in the rural tourism research area at the international level. So again, welcome, Elisabeth. Professor Xavier, he is professor at the University of Surrey in the UK and editor of the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. Xavier has a very interesting career at the research and academic area. He specializes on responsible tourism marketing, sustainability certification, sustainability supply chain management, training and for sustainable change, and among other areas. So we appreciate a lot the effort that you did, Xavier and Elisabeth, to stay today with us. We know that it's not easy because the limited time that you have. So we appreciate a lot. So especially to Xavier and also Elisabeth, because both of them are combining the presentation in this Congress with other Congress at the same time. So thank you again. So Xavier, we know that you have limited time, so we ready for one presentation, more or less 20 minutes, no more of 30 minutes. And after that, if the public here has question, maybe we have time for one or two questions, no more, okay? And after that, we continue with Professor Elisabeth. So Xavier, if you're ready, the time and the screen is yours. And thank you.
Great, thank you very much for having me. As you just heard, I'm in between two events. I'm also at in a university in the Arctic in Norway, and I start the session there in about 20 minutes from now. So then Elisabeth will take over from that point. I wanted to reflect on some of my experiences in publishing and editing in the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. I believe that these are applicable to anywhere that you want to publish in the tourism sector at the moment. But I just wanted to start on a more personal note from my experience within the Journal of Sustainable Tourism itself. Let me just show you what my dashboard looks like today on the left-hand side. This is the number of papers I have to deal with as we speak. Okay, so at any one point in time, we have 50 papers that we have out there awaiting referee scores. We always have people who are overdue in providing the reviews. I have worked this weekend in assigning more referees. There's always a large number of papers that come through the process. And in fact, between 2019 and 2021, the number of papers submitted to our journal, and I imagine every other journal, went up by about 300%. I don't know whether during COVID lockdown, academics basically finished all the papers they had never been able to finish before, and they just had a good clear out of their, of their backlog, or what happened. But to be honest, the thing here is, as journals, we cannot publish more papers. We're receiving more submissions, but we cannot publish more papers. Now, you as a PhD student, you may see a paper in a journal published in 2017, 18, and you think, I'm going to do just that. Well, just that won't be good enough, because now we have 300% more submissions, and therefore we're going to be much more critical in what we expect. In JOST, but I know it's the same elsewhere, we reject about 75% of all the submissions. The reason why we do this is because our biggest bottleneck is finding good reviewers that can altruistically give up their personal time to review papers for us. Thanks, Elisabeth, for being part of the editorial board and being one of the people who does that regularly. We also do plagiarism checks now. So when you submit first your paper, we look at the similarity index between your paper and other papers that have been submitted before. And if your similarity is more than 15%, we will send it back to you and ask you to actually write in your own words, not recycling other people's work. Of the 25% of papers that are left and we choose to send for peer review, we end up rejecting about half of those, and the other half get accepted. So as a rule of thumb, you could assume that if your paper was not as rejected, but was sent for peer review, it's quite likely that you have a 50-50 chance that eventually it will end up being accepted in that journal. In our journal, every journal does it slightly differently. We take pride in having a quick turnaround for papers that are under review process. Our average at the moment is 51 days. Okay, and our impact factor keeps going up. You can see here, I wrote impact factor for 2021 at 9.4 because I wrote these a few days ago. The new impact factors have come out this week and they have changed. Okay, so again, because of COVID, everybody's impact factors have gone up. The reason being everybody has been citing very recent papers. Okay, so there's an artificial inflation on the impact factors. So don't take impact factors too seriously right now. They almost reflect what percentage of your papers had a COVID element or didn't in the last 2 years. Okay, so I publish 10 articles per month. And when I receive articles every week, I have to ask myself, will this be one of the best articles this month? So essentially, I say to myself, I do the work on a weekly basis. And I say to myself, of the articles I have received this week, eventually I will only accept 2, right? 2 per week is more or less the equivalent of 10 per month. So I will look at all the papers and say, there is no incentive for me to send more than 3 or 4 articles per week for peer review because I only want to accept the 2 best articles. Okay? And typically it takes about 8 months from your first submission to your final submission. What are the main reasons why articles get rejected or later on fail through the process? Well, first of all, very often we find that titles where the emphasis of the article is the location, physical, geographical location of the study, and not the novelty of the findings, they start to worry me at the beginning. I also worry about articles where the abstract does not emphasize the novelty and the significance, where the abstract you've dedicated too many words to explain the context, but not what you have added to that context. Ultimately, a journal article needs to have that novelty element. Okay, I'm worried as well about introductions that are too long. Many of the introductions seem to overlap with the literature review. So what I'm proposing here is an introduction for a journal article essentially has typically 3 paragraphs, and each paragraph has one particular purpose. First paragraph tells us, why is the topic important? And what is the state of the art? What's the knowledge that we have of that topic? The second paragraph tells us, what's the gap in that knowledge? And why does that gap need to be studied now? Why is this urgent? And the third paragraph tells me, what are the aims of my study? And how do the aims of my study respond to the gap that we have just identified? And you may say, Xavier, this seems a little bit mechanical. What I would propose is start by knowing you do the mechanical part well, and then you can add some poetry on top of it, right? But don't start by flowery language. Start by, you know that the structure is correct. Okay, in terms of lit review, key mistakes, very often too descriptive. And there's no theoretical framework. I'm just, you tell me more about the location than you tell me about what is the theory that we're trying to study here, and why is that theory particularly interesting and relevant to most readers. Okay. Very often I find methodologies that when they're quantitative, typical structural equational modeling sort of work, they're very mechanical. Now, I am not saying structural equational modeling is a bad tool. I'm just saying, like every tool, it can be well used or badly used. And we see too many examples of a poor use of this tool. And also, I tend to see that qualitative papers tend to be okay on sampling, explaining the questions, but they tend to be weak on explaining the data analysis, explaining how will we gather, not only how we'll gather data, but how will we interpret the data. So if you just put a throwaway comment there that says, and I'm going to do thematic analysis, and my question will be, but how? And how do we know that this is done in a rigorous way? And I'm tired of seeing studies that measure behavioral intentions and not actual behaviors. We were putting much more emphasis now in publishing papers that measure real behaviors, not behavioral intentions. Because if you give me a questionnaire that says, Xavier, on a scale of 1 to 10, would you like to be a good husband? Well, I'm going to give myself a 10. If you ask my wife, she may say differently. And maybe my actions will show a big gap between my intentions and my behaviors, right? But just asking people intentions, like, I mean, come on. If every Friday I intend to drink less alcohol and exercise more over the weekend, by Sunday night, it's a different story, okay? Results, particularly if you're doing a PhD, the results tend to be out of date by the time you publish them. I am still receiving papers in JOST with results collected in 2019. I understand as a PhD student, you may want to finish your entire PhD before you complete the work. Or that even as a researcher, you may want to do work and then come back to it later on. But you don't have to publish out-of-date research, right? I mean, you need to be aware that one of the important things is timely research. And if you found, and a colleague of mine basically found, look, she collected data for her PhD, then she had 2 babies, came back to trying to publish from her PhD 6 years later. And I said to her, this is fine. Let's now collect additional research, surveying the same people again. And then we do a longitudinal study where you compare how they behave at 2 different points in time. And then it became so much more interesting than trying to publish data from 2017. Okay. And very often the results that we come across, I'm reading and thinking, yeah, it's okay. It's just not very new, right? It may be new for your particular hometown, but why should the world care? Okay. Very often I get very worried when I see studies that we jump directly from results to conclusions and they pretend the discussion just happened somewhere. And I'm thinking, but it's not there. Or very often I see there's a fundamental difference between theory testing and theory development. What do I mean by this? Many discussions basically say, I found this result, and this result is in keeping or consistent with the theory of planned behavior, or these are the theory, the other theory. And thinking, great, so we've tested theory, but have you added something to that theory? Are you basically saying we can, where is the novelty of your study? Right? If you one more paper that says the theory of planned behavior is a good theory, it was useful for me to explain a situation, then I'll probably say, yeah, okay, but that's not enough. Okay. And then sometimes the conclusions tend to be very formulaic, and actually the contribution is not very explicit. The last couple of things, I'll just leave them there because it just doesn't make much sense to dwell on those any further. So let me just take you through some of the things I think you need to do good research. Okay. And I think that to try to make this a little bit more interactive, you could write this down as a list, and then you could give yourself a score. And because you're not going to show me the score afterwards, you're not even going to show the person sitting next to you, it's in your interest to be really honest with yourself and say, I will write down the number, not the number that I wish I was, but the number that I really know I am. And there is no way all of us are an 8, a 9, or a 10 on every one of these. right? Like, come on, use the full range of marks, okay? So just be fair. First, motivation. Why are you publishing? Are you publishing because you jumped? You basically said, I really enjoy myself publishing. This is where I see the best side of myself. I get a sense of I'm achieving something. Or are you publishing because you said, my department forces me to publish? In Spain, for the ANECA, for Sexenius, I need to publish. I don't like it, I just have to do it. And I'm saying this is important because this will fundamentally affect how you do your work afterwards. Second thing, how much time do you generally dedicate to research? And how much time do you dedicate to something else? Right? So I would suggest that to write one good paper, it takes 18 months of your time. And anybody who's writing more papers than that is either very good at co-authoring or is piggybacking on other people's work. Okay? And there are a few people in the world who are very good at co-authoring, but there are also a lot of people who are taking advantage of others. Health warning. Multitasking is bad for you. Okay? Most of us cannot multitask and do it well. Stop pretending that you can, right? Think about cooking. How many of you can cook one dinner really well? Many of us. How many of you could cook 3 dinners really well at the same time? Not many. Most people will burn their dinner, will overcook it, will boil it wrongly, will make mistakes. Particularly at the beginning of your career, do not pretend you can do 3 studies at once. Okay? And also be really protective of your research time, right? So, and by that, what I mean is when you're researching, Microsoft Outlook has to be switched off and your phone has to be switched off. And you need to have a reasonable amount of time to be able to do this, right? In my research day, I work from home, not from the office, and Outlook is switched off, and I will look at Outlook at the end of the day, not during the day, because otherwise it's a distraction. And even if you are the dean of your faculty, you can have time away from your emails, right? Pretending you cannot do that is believing you are much more important than you really are. The world can wait. Yeah, for your wisdom and your feedback and your knowledge. You know, if you create a situation where people are so dependent on you, they cannot wait for 8 hours for your feedback, you're not very good at managing your team. Okay. And also my advice here would be try to make fewer changes between papers. If you, for example, work in a team of 4 or 5 people, even if you're 2 or 3, you could say, I am really, really good at this theory or at this method, right? And what you bring to that team is the theory or the method, and somebody else will bring something else, right? So I know of a couple of colleagues of mine that one of them is very good at structured equational modeling and designs the surveys. The other one is good at a range of theories. And they always say, we always collaborate with a third person. The third person will do the field data collection. The person good at theories has written the questionnaire and will write the lit review and the discussion. And the person who is very good at methods will write the methodology and the results. And they have a system, right? Each person in the team specializes in writing one section. When you choose to co-author with your friends and you all know about the same things and you have the same skills, you don't complement each other. You just overlap. Right? This is like eating pasta after eating pasta. It's not good for you. Right? One of you needs to be the salad, one needs to be the pasta, one needs to be the dessert. Right? You don't just collaborate with people who are exactly the same as you. Money, you're going to need it, and increasingly you're going to need more of it. Okay? And you're going to need it if nothing else, because to actually have real time to do research, it takes time. And it means it's time that you stop doing something else. Right? So the days where people could do research as hobbies are long gone. Okay? And you need money to collect data because the data sets we need to be handling are getting bigger and bigger. The theory very often is added retrospectively. The theory is not the same as your subject area. Ecotourism is not a theory. Sustainable tourism is not a theory. Okay, so you need to find out which is the theory I'm going to use to explain the behavior that I'm trying to analyze. Okay, and my advice here is don't pick a mix. Most of us cannot be experts in multiple theories at the same time. Access to data. I know you may say I'm going to do a questionnaire or do interviews, but I'm worried if that's what your argument is going to be, because very often my point here is, but what's really new about your work? How could you do this and somebody else couldn't do it? Is the novelty the location? Then not so good. Is the novelty actually the timing or the volume or the longitudinal element or the comparison or the unique source of your data? Or sometimes actually you could reuse data from a colleague, but now just with a new angle. Your colleague would have done an analysis. I collected data with interviews with people, and they used a particular theory to explain it. And then you say, well, but now I can show the same data to a psychologist or a sociologist who will analyze the same transcript from the same interviews, but from a different point of view. In terms of methods, we already talked about this. I'm suggesting that we move beyond surveys and interviews. We've done those to death. And if we can, we move much more towards experimental research. And then you need time to write. And actually, very often, I co-author with people who don't have the skills for writing. They're good at the ideas, but they just don't manage to write them well, particularly when they're writing in a second or even a third language. Okay, so there's a lot of work that needs to go into making sure that the way in which you write this is perfectly understandable. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to hand over to Elisabeth. Okay, I've now stopped sharing my screen. Elisabeth, over to you. I wish you all the very best at this conference. And I'm leaving Elisabeth the hard part, which is obviously now not only her personal experience, but answering to some of the questions based on what we've talked about now. Okay, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Xavier, we would like to say, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Can you hear me, Elisabeth?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So we would like to say thank you to Xavier again, because this is a very interesting ideas based in, this is a good perspective to consider not only the outside trends and also the inside of ours before we start to writing and preparing new research. So because you are not here with us face to face, I would like to say to you, Elisabeth, that the people here enjoy the presentation. Okay, we are in this moment around 40 people here in the room. Okay, and we are really motivated with this session. Yes, and this is the moment to time for you. So if you like, we are expecting if you can share with us your ideas as very experimental, considering your perspective and your research area. So, okay, Elisabeth, when you like.
Okay, can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, and we are, yes, perfect
Yes.
in this moment, perfect.
Okay, thank you. And I thank you also for the invitation. And I hope that you are having a very interesting conference. I'm very sad I cannot be there. I have been there some weeks before in Granada, and it's such a nice place to be and so nice colleagues. And I'm sure it will be a very inspiring conference. But let's now come to the second part of this speech that I have combined with Xavier. I have a personal view here on some of the issues. Some of them might be familiar to you, some not so much, and it's a very personal view that may be more or less meaningful to one or the other. So I will present here a little bit of my personal profile as an academic. I will present you some factors that have driven and still drive my research activities, challenges of being a researcher and an academic author, and how to choose where, when, what to publish, things that Xavier also referred to previously, and also how to deal with reviews and also negative feedback. So last but not least, challenges of being a reviewer. As Xavier mentioned, I am reviewing for Journal of Sustainable Tourism because I'm part of the editorial reviewer board. So I'm supposed to review more than 1 or 2 articles a year for this particularly demanding journal. But first of all, some of you know me already. I'm German, but I'm living in Portugal for so many time now. I went to Portugal in 1988. And I've been basically living and working and studying and researching in Aveiro at the University of Aveiro. I did a pre-Bologna 5 years degree in tourism management and planning by that university, and then a master in business administration at the ESA University of Porto, today's Porto Business School, where I came to know my supervisor for the master's thesis and also for the PhD thesis. And both theses were actually about rural tourism already. So I'm studying rural tourism since the beginning of my academic life, so to say. So that's why I have a strong focus here and a lot of research that I have published in that field. But not only rural tourism, also related fields like nature-based tourism, cultural tourism, food and wine tourism, also accessible tourism, where I was invited to another very interesting project, which has made some impact on me personally, and that I find a very interesting field and very relevant field. And as general transversal areas of interest, I am interested in consumer behavior in tourism, lately very much in the tourist experience, and in sustainability yielding destination marketing. If you look me up on Scopus, you find this. I have published quite a bit, and you see my first publication was in 1999, and this was about my master thesis. And then there is a gap because, well, actually, do you know when Scopus was launched? 2004. I am pre-Scopus, so to say, and actually my previous research in the master and the PhD, it was very much going to libraries, taking photocopies, asking at the university documental service to get an article that would arrive perhaps 6 weeks later just to find out that it's not useful at all. So I feel sometimes like a dinosaur. Times have changed a lot, and it helps a lot to all of us, to all of the researchers, to get very relevant information through very interesting tools of searching what you actually need and finding the good materials and finding the authors that are most cited in several aspects. So another issue I would like to mention is that the number of tourism journals have multiplicated since I started my research. There are now around 140. When I started doing research, there were 3 or 4 that were actually relevant. And at our university, we had the hard copies of Journal of Travel Research, Journal of Sustainable Tourism, and Annals of Tourism Research, nothing more. Tourism management, of course, yes. But today we have so many other opportunities. So I think we are in a different world. It's everything much quicker. And we are also working in teams. And here I also put the names of my co-authors with whom I have been working a lot. The 2 first are colleagues from my university, and many others I have met and I have been working with in several projects, and a lot of them are also PhD and master students of mine. Times have changed. Times are also more challenging today. Some initial papers here, I would like to show you that, well, the first paper, 1999, although so long ago, it is also one of my most cited papers, and it was written together with my supervisor and his colleague and friend, Dwayne Davis. And at that time, I didn't know anything about publishing, and it's a good way to start your work with your supervisor. Actually, it took some time. I did my PhD in 2002, and only by 2004 I wrote another paper based on my PhD thesis, and another one as well in Annals of Tourism Research. And later there came a book chapter, which was actually an occasion because I went with my colleagues, Maria João and Celeste, to a conference, and I invited them to look at my data and to do a study on that to present at the conference. And later it was published in a book chapter. It was selected, and I didn't even know, we only got to know later that it would be eventually published in Scopus as well. Seasonality in rural tourism, this is another example in which I'd used the data from my PhD together with the PhD student that was looking at seasonality in rural tourism. So he could actually look at it from a deeper perspective of having done a lot of literature review in that field. So you can share your data, you can look at it from different perspectives, you can go deeper in certain aspects. And another note, because Xavier mentioned it, and there was a debate in the editorial review of your board of JOS about that issue. When is your data outdated? And I do not really share Xavier's very demanding perspective that data from 2019 is too old because it was before COVID. I think it depends on the data. It depends if things have changed substantially, but you hear he is the main editor, he will look at it and he will do the filtering. And if he sees data that is older, you must be very good at arguing why it is still relevant. Here I have just one example that I still published things from my PhD in 2010, and it is has been quite importantly cited, and I think it is one of my most interesting articles actually, because I looked at something that was quite new at that time, the concept of cultural proximity, and the way that I found the connection between destination image and cultural proximity. I think it's still an important issue. So if you have outdated research, it is more difficult, more challenging today, as Xavier said, because we are in a very, very highly competitive world today for authors. But don't think that if you have very interesting results and you didn't find the time to write it up, you might perhaps add some new data to it, as Xavier suggested, but don't give up on good data and good results. Well, factors that have driven and still drive my research activities and consequent publishing: motivation. I think for me, the first thing is motivation, and for most of you, it should be probably. For me, it was very important to find area in which I could do meaningful research, identifying myself with a certain critical stance on mass tourism in tourism research. And I was very, since the beginning, interested in sustainability. Rural tourism that is a bit of an alternative was my interest. Curiosity, interest in social psychology, consumer behavior, also an open mind and a fascination about learning. I think this is very crucial if you want to be an academic. You never stop learning. Research is a passion, an insecure path to begin with. We don't know where we'll end. And actually, we are kind of travelers into the unknown. That is part of its beauty. We may even find things we did not expect and then need to dig into further to help explain. As Thorsten Veblen already said, the outcome of any serious research can only be to make two questions grow where only one grew before. So I think that is something that is actually quite inspiring, but you must be willing to cope with this. Factors that have driven my research in particular was also the area of interest in rural tourism that was very much related to my liking of the Portuguese rural areas. When I came there, many people were only fascinated and actually thinking of holidays on the beach. There was large investment in beach tourism, and rural areas were kind of neglected. And I had that conviction of its large tourism potential because when I traveled there, I found it quite a distinct way of life, and there is so much difference for the good and for the bad between, for example, coastal areas in Portugal and the hinterland areas. They seem to be a little bit forgotten, although they have so much potential. It's about people, it's about heritage, very good food and wine, it's beautiful landscapes, it's being out of the crowds, being in a different space and time. So I had some conscious also of the challenges that are related to this. Hinterland, rural, peripheral areas have to deal with a lot of problems. But simultaneously, I found here an opportunity to do meaningful research contributing potentially to sustainable rural development. If I did this research in collaboration also with stakeholders from these areas and with bodies that are developing rural areas. What else is very crucial, and also Xavier pointed at it, the opportunity and the time to think about and develop new projects. So for me, the sabbaticals are quite important, but for you that are sometimes, I imagine there are some PhD students that are dedicating their whole time to their PhD, or nearly, they're very much focused on it. You need that time to do good research. Xavier talked about 18 months to write a good article. I agree, you need that time to become mature in actually what you want to do, to find your path, to write down, establish a good research methodology, a good research design. Of course, if you have gained some experience, particularly in specific fields, this time can be shortened. And also working with others that are specialized in specific topics can help you also shorten that time. But still, you need the time to develop research instruments, to test them, to implement the research, to collect the data, and then, of course, to analyze and to write down the results. So you also need to go to conferences. You also need to share your experience with others, to discuss with others. You need networking. So I hope that you will do this all in this conference in Granada. And another issue that has happened to me, and that might happen to you as well, invitations to engage in applied research projects through entities that are interested in developing, for example, accessible tourism. It happened to me in Lausanne, which is a nature destination in the mountains that were focused on becoming the first accessible tourism destination in Portugal. And it was very interesting to do the research for them. Also in Hotel, which is a social tourism entity that has a program about senior tourism, and cross-border tourism between central Portugal and Castilla y Leon, where I found about the importance of wine tourism and the very interesting opportunities and potentiality of also doing cross-border activities in tourism. And last but not least, an Erasmus Plus e-cultures project in which I joined a team from Germany, Italy, and Sweden to develop engaging cultural heritage management education in collaboration with attraction managers. So here again, we also see that these invitations are very often very interesting, particularly if we are connecting with other researchers and with interesting stakeholders that are willing and interested to using your research in the field. I found this also very motivating. Well, challenges of being an academic, strategic planning versus taking chances. Well, you have an advantage if your research is focused and if you keep track on what is happening, because actually it takes a long time to get specialized. You can deepen your readings. You can get inspired also by distinct approaches in the same field. So even if you focus, for example, in rural tourism and marketing, don't forget that you can get so much insight in rural tourism from sociologists, from geographers, from economists, from anthropologists. So I find this highly inspiring. Continue reading, go to conferences. Specialized conferences are, in my view, also very, very interesting. And do ask questions and try to be inquisitive about things. But you may also use the focus to then diversify into related topics in terms of rural tourism, for example, local products, food and wine. I had coordinated 4 years research project about wine tourism in Portugal. Probably I wouldn't have received the funding if I didn't have the experience from another project about rural tourism before. So try and diversify, but in a related manner. Slow tourism, I think, is something that is really very interesting now, and I want to diversify into that field or deepen there as well. And co-creation, for example, co-creative rural tourism and cultural tourism activities are also an interesting point that we can add to rural tourism. It's very important to keep track, to understand the evolution, to look for gaps in terms of themes and approaches. Already Xavier talked about it. Also, approaches need to be novel. Let's stop all doing the same thing that we are comfortable with. Always questionnaires and interviews. Let's go to social media analysis. Let's go to look at semiotic analysis of images. Let's go to the neural labs with psychologists that you might get to know. So try to diversify also the tools that you use. All this helps develop your own understanding and help also develop the theory in the field. And it helps also to implement more meaningful research, often in collaboration. Find relevant partners that complement your skills. Don't forget the stakeholders that you might help improve their strategies. If you have good stakeholders, they may help you also collect the data and look at them from a pragmatic, practical point of view. Usually in your articles, there is a section about contributions, not only to theory, but also to practice. And there it's very good if you do this kind of more action research in which you are in continuous contact with the stakeholders that you are studying and that you try to help, that might also share their thoughts on your ongoing results and make them more meaningful in the end. And if you have this all nicely arranged and the results that really are meaningful, you might think of publishing. Of course, you sometimes can also publish on your way, work in progress, but it's a different kind of publishing. Frequently, it's just in the conferences and some work in progress, a research note, for example. Sometimes we are invited to research projects. This can be a good or bad thing. Please try out to find out before what it is all about. I have been invited to many projects, and sometimes I found, well, perhaps I shouldn't have done so. Perhaps I should not have gone into that direction, because all the compromises that you take away time that you might dedicate on something that is more meaningful and more relevant to your research stream, and where you can actually be more productive and more you can give more of yourself, and you also can learn more from them. It might be great to be invited, but it might be a nightmare, taking away precious time. Sometimes it's important to say no. I know it's not easy. However, there should always be some relationship to your research interest and to your expertise to reach meaningful results. And then again, you can eventually publish together with others. Oops. Is happening now? Okay. Now, how to choose where to publish? Well, why? Xavier already said it. We are in a very competitive time. We are obliged by institutions to do publishing and in index and high-rated journals. It is very important for our own career evolution. It's important to get research funding. So it's a kind of a virtuous circle, it should be. Yeah. So if you have good research that you can share, you get recognized for it, and you can then more easily get funding. you can also more easily have the opportunities to collaborate with other interesting researchers, and because you get some credibility for certain tasks and for your expertise. When to publish, of course, if you get the results, but it takes time. They must be results that are founded, that are grounded on systematic, theoretically founded research design, well-developed research projects. It takes time, and it takes time to write it down, often in collaboration, and if it is done in a good way, as already Xavier hinted to, you can define roles. There are people that are more specialized in writing the theoretical part, others more specialized in the methodology part, and of course, the leading author must have the general argument in mind and should have a particular role also in controlling the process and pushing it, and also finding the deadlines. Where to publish? Well, you may try a conference communication approach first. So this helps you to get a deadline. Sometimes we get involved in so many tasks, multitasking. It is difficult, and sometimes it's our reality and we need to do it, although it's not healthy, I know. But sometimes we cannot do without it. We are, as professors, involved in so many different things. We have organizational tasks, we have our teaching, we have the supervision of students in different degrees. And there's a multiplicity of activities that we have to cope with. It is very important to reserve time for research and for writing. I agree totally with Xavier that you should try and find a couple of hours that you can dedicate yourself to your research in each week. And of course, if you're a PhD student, you should be very, very focused on that. You should have more time than just a couple of hours every day. You find also in the conference a chance of constructive feedback, and sometimes even the chance of publication associated to the conference, but you should be careful. If you have already some good results, you should make your research visible, and this means that it should be indexed, particularly important for PhD students who do their research based on articles. They should be interested in having such opportunities, but only if they have good publication opportunities available at the conference. You may also directly submit to a journal. The question is which one. I would suggest you look at your thematic focus. Again, if you should never write to the Journal of Sustainable Tourism if you don't have a really strong argument related to sustainability. Sustainability is a kind of a buzzword. It has been used too often and sometimes in not a correct context, or it is too easy to use sometimes. You must really convince that you are having an important contribution to the field here. And you should also look at which are the references that you use more in your own research. So these are the journals that might be more interesting to present. But of course, it depends on the quality of your research. As Xavier said before, the Journal of Sustainable Tourism and other very important journals that have a very high importance impact factor, they do not easily accept research that is not very mature yet. So if you are in your beginning, don't necessarily try, although you might have very original research that qualifies enough to get into the highly racial issues. These might be great opportunities to, if your study fits very well into this special theme, maybe a good opportunity to publish earlier, because usually the editors of special issues, they are keen in a certain time frame, identify interesting contributions to a particular field. So it might be an opportunity to publish quicker, and also it may be cited more if you are focusing on a specific special theme. Well, and if we get rejected, or if you have demanding reviews and get negative feedback, don't panic. It happens all the time. I have a long record of some rejections. Major reviews are very, very common. And sometimes the reviewers, oh, we are running out of time. Okay, the reviewers can be not so constructive. I try to be, but don't panic. Try to improve. Take it as a constructive idea to improve and eventually add some new research to it. Try sometimes another journal, but add improvements always. So if you are rejected in JOST, try at a lower quartile journal. There are papers that have been rejected twice or more times and are accepted in a third or fourth round. It happened to me and to my co-authors. So challenges of being a reviewer are also multiple, as Xavier said, and I'm very glad that there are these desk rejections, because we only get from JOST already papers that have a certain degree of quality. I get so many invitations. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 invitations a day. It shows that people are really running for the publications. I don't only get the invitations from the papers from the journals that I'm more connected to, but from many different journals. And reviewing takes a lot of time. I cannot always accept the reviews. I try to be constructive, focus on consistency, methodological rigor, strength, quality, clarity, logic, and meaningfulness of the argument and the contribution, with more or less demand depending on the journal, of course. And I also may suggest additional views when I do the reviewing. However, you might get some more harsh reviews. Don't panic. Don't get depressed about anything, because take it as something positive, as an opportunity to improve. Academy is a give and take, and we write and get harsh reviews, but we also have to reviews one day, and it is our duty to continue in this community function of having our research being visible and shared. We learn a lot through the process, being more intense reading and also reflecting on how we could improve in our own perspectives, in our own papers, which helps us improve our own writing, increase the impact of our work, both in academy and in practice. And this is what actually I'm more interested in, and I hope that you also have the opportunity to do so in your research path. I wish you a great and inspiring conference. Good luck with sharing your quality results and great new ideas for more meaningful research to come. Thank you for your attention.